I want to talk to women today about your inner protector, how a strong animus keeps predators away. And when you understand what the animus is and what happens when it hasn't been fully developed, something inside you will recognize it immediately. Because this is not information you are learning for the first time. This is something you already know. You have simply never had the language for it. What Jung actually meant. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who spent his life mapping the interior landscape of the human psyche. And one of the things he understood, which was radical for his time and in many ways remains radical now, is that the psyche is not simple. It is not one coherent self moving through the world. It is a community of selves, a layered, contradictory, endlessly complex inner world populated by figures and forces that most of us are only dimly aware of. Jung called these figures archetypes. Archetypes are not personal memories or individual experiences. They are universal patterns that belong to what Jung called the collective unconscious, the deepest layer of the psyche that we all share, the inherited psychological inheritance of the entire human species. And archetypes are not abstract concepts. They live in us. They speak through us. They shape what we're drawn to, what we fear, what we dream about, what we unconsciously broadcast to the people around us. Among the most important archetypes, according to Jung, are the anima and the animus. The anima is the inner feminine figure that lives in a man's unconscious. She carries his capacity for feeling, beauty, relatedness, depth. And the animus is the inner masculine figure that lives in a woman's unconscious. He is her capacity for structure, direction, discernment, protection. He is the part of her that knows her own worth and is willing to defend it. Now, I want to be careful here because Jung's language about masculine and feminine can sound outdated for some people, and sometimes we can misread it as saying that structure and logic belong to men and feeling belongs to women. That is not what he meant, and it's not what I mean. When we talk about the animus as carrying masculine energy, we're talking about a psychological function, not a gender assignment. This is the energy of boundary, containment, clear-eyed seeing. Every woman has it. The question is whether it has been developed or whether it remains wounded, suppressed, or asleep. What is the wounded animus? What does a wounded animus look like in daily life? Because this is where theory becomes something you can actually feel in your own body. When the animus has been properly developed, it often manifests in one of two directions. The first direction is what we might call the collapsed animus. This is the woman who has learned, usually very early in life, that her needs are inconvenient, that saying no creates conflict, that expressing her own desires risks rejection or punishment. And so she learns to make herself agreeable, to preemptively accommodate, to give before she has ever been asked, hoping that generosity will create safety. And people who exploit others can sense this from a distance. The collapsed animus doesn't protect her because it has never been allowed to speak. The second direction is what we might call the armored animus. This is the woman who has been hurt badly enough that she has erected a kind of psychological fortress around herself. She is hypervigilant, hypercritical, deeply mistrustful of vulnerability in herself and in others. And from the outside, this can look like strength, but it is not the strength of a developed animus. It is the rigidity of a wounded one. Because real discernment is flexible. Real protection is not the same as walls. The healthy animus is the inner voice that says with extraordinary calm, this does not feel right. Without rage, but with clarity. He's the part of you that can be fully open, fully warm, fully present in your own feminine energy and still hold the thread back to yourself. He's what allows you to love without losing yourself, to desire without becoming desperate, to stay in the vulnerability of real intimacy without abandoning your own perception. And here's what matters most. A developed positive animus is not something you perform outwardly. It is something that radiates. Other people feel it before they can even name it, including and especially people who would otherwise see you as a target. Why certain people sense an unprotected woman? I want to talk about something that can feel uncomfortable to discuss because it can slide into victim blaming if we are not precise with the language. So let me be very, very precise. Being targeted by a manipulative or predatory person is never the fault of the person being targeted. Full stop. These dynamics exist because of the psychology and the choices of the person doing the harm. And at the same time, understanding how our unconscious material makes us more or less accessible to certain kinds of people is one of the most practically useful and compassionate things we can do for ourselves. It is not about fault. Once again, no victim blaming. It's not about fault. It is about agency. Clarissa Pinkola Estés, the Jungian analyst and author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, writes about the instinctive woman, the wild woman, the deep feminine intelligence that knows. She knows when something is off. She smells it the way an animal smells a change in the weather. She feels it in her body before her mind has constructed an explanation. And Estes makes a devastating observation. Many women, particularly women who grew up in environments where their instincts were repeatedly overridden and punished, have learned to distrust this knowing. They have learned to smile when their body wants to leave, to explain when their gut says simply no, to stay in rooms and relationships and conversations that their nervous system has already told them are not safe. And the people who prey on this vulnerability are often extraordinarily attuned to it. Even if they could not articulate what they are reading, they notice who apologizes for things that don't require apology. They notice who over-explains her own boundaries, who gives before being asked to, or responds to coldness with more effort rather than with distance, mistakes intensity for intimacy because she has been primed to confuse the two. They notice women who stay after being disrespected because leaving feels more dangerous than staying. It is a learned adaptation. It is what happened when a very intelligent, often very sensitive child grew up in an environment where the cost of having needs was too high. The Animus did not have the conditions to develop properly because development requires a safe masculine mirror, and that mirror was absent or distorted. One of the most clinically significant and meaningful aspects of this entire conversation is the relationship between a woman's early experience of masculine presence and the development of her animus. Jung believed, and subsequent generations of psychologists have elaborated beautifully on this, that a woman's first template for masculine energy comes from her father or from the primary masculine figure in her early life. This is not a romantic or sexual connection. It is a developmental one. The father or his equivalent is meant to function as the first experience of the world beyond the mother-child dyad. He brings structure into what was previously just warmth and murder. He models what it looks like for a person to hold their own ground. And in doing so, he gives his daughter a living reference point for her own inner masculine. When that figure was present and consistent and safe, the animus develops naturally. The woman grows up with an inner sense that it is possible to be protected without being controlled, to be held without being suffocated, to be seen by masculine energy without being consumed by it. But when that figure was absent or violent or emotionally unavailable, and the masculine energy in her early life was fundamentally untrustworthy, the animus internalized that wounding. And she may spend years, sometimes decades, unconsciously seeking in her romantic relationships what she was never able to complete with her father. Because the psyche is always moving toward wholeness. The instinct to heal is actually very healthy. It is the unconscious direction that sometimes needs compassion and redirecting. This is where therapy, and specifically depth-oriented therapy, can be genuinely transformative. Because the therapeutic relationship itself can become a space where the animus begins to be rebuilt, where a woman practices being seen without being used, heard without being manipulated, held without being consumed. And she begins to discover that her own inner masculine can be trusted. Building a strong positive animus, how does it actually look like in practice? I know that for many of you, this is not an abstract conversation. This is something you're living right now or something you have just come through. And what you need is not only understanding, but direction, action. The first thing I want to say is that building a strong animus is not about becoming harder. This is perhaps the most important thing I will say in this entire video. The goal is not to become someone who does not feel, or open, or who does not love with full presence, and who avoids vulnerability. No, the goal is to be able to do all of those things and still hold the thread back to yourself. Softness with a spine, openness with discernment, love without any self-abandonment. The first practice is learning to trust your first no. The body knows before the mind catches up. If something in you contracts when you meet someone, do not immediately begin constructing reasons why you must be wrong. The second practice is behavioral integrity, and by this I mean what you say. If you tell someone that a particular behavior is not acceptable and then you stay when the behavior continues, your animus is learning that your words don't have weight behind them. Start small if you need to. Say no to something minor and let it hold. Feel what it is like to have your own word mean something to yourself and to others. The third practice involves sitting with the question of who you become around a particular person, not who you wish you were or who you feel pressured to be. Who do you actually become? Do you become more anxious in their presence or more calm? Do you become more articulate and expansive, or do you shrink into careful performance? Do you feel more like yourself or less like yourself? A healthy masculine energy, whether it is in another person or in your own developing animus, creates safety, not confusion. It creates presence, not performance. Finally, consider the role of the body. The animus is not only a psychological construct, he lives in the nervous system. Practices like somatic therapy, MDR, yoga, breath work, and even something as simple as learning to pause before responding in conversation, all of this build authority. The woman who pauses before she answers or does not rush to fill silence, does not explain herself or her nose, these are expressions of a developing animus. The strongest women in this world are not the ones who have stopped feeling. No, they are not the ones who have decided that love is too dangerous and that independence requires emotional isolation. They are the women who have done the work, sometimes painful or slow, always worthwhile, of building a relationship with their own inner masculine. And when that inner protector is strong, you do not have to screen people more aggressively. You do not have to become more suspicious or more guarded. You simply begin to carry yourself in a way that communicates at a level that is deeper than words. I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. And the price of excess is integrity. And the people who were never going to offer that, they feel it. They understand the incompatibility. The frequencies do not match, and they move on because something in the interaction simply didn't open the way it usually does for them. And the people who can meet you with genuine care, with honesty, with the willingness to be accountable, they feel it too, and they come closer. That is what a strong animus does. He does not keep love out. He keeps the pretenders out so that the real thing actually has somewhere to land. If this resonated with something you're living right now, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And the question I want to leave you with is this: was your inner protector there from the beginning, waiting for you to trust him? Or is he someone you are only now beginning to meet?